They believed relief could be carved directly into the skull. Imagine lying on a wooden table, the air heavy with incense and smoke from burning herbs, while hands calloused from years of crude practice lifted a stone tool or primitive drill. The whisper among ancient healers was that illness did not stem from within the body, but from spirits trapped in the head, clawing at the mind. To free them, a hole was opened. The first rays of pain, sharp as lightning, cracked across the senses, but for those who survived, it was considered a rebirth, and astonishingly, some did. The bone around the wound began to knit again, leaving behind circular scars like silent testimonies of survival. What makes it more haunting is the discovery of skulls thousands of years old, each marked with these mysterious circles, proof that this was no isolated madness, but a widespread conviction, repeated generation after generation. The thought is unsettling. People willingly offered themselves to this ritual, not out of desperation alone, but from belief in healing. Their eyes must have fixed on the ceiling of caves or mud-walled huts as visions blurred and the edge of consciousness slipped away. For them, this was hope. The air thick with chants, the smell of blood mingling with damp earth, the healer's shadow looming large against flickering torchlight. It created an atmosphere both sacred and terrifying. This was not science as we know it, but faith wrapped in ritual. And though the practice seems barbaric today, to them it carried the weight of salvation. Stranger still, such procedures did not vanish with ancient tribes. Even in the early civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, tools grew sharper, metals gleamed in the torchlight, and yet the same belief persisted. To cut was to cure. Gold, copper, and bronze instruments were passed down like relics, their edges dulling after countless incisions. In those days, infection was not understood. The invisible realm of germs was centuries away from discovery. Yet, despite the odds, some patients lived. Perhaps their survival gave fuel to the healer's reputation, cementing the practice as divine knowledge. Every healed patient was celebrated, every corpse explained away as fate. The boundary between miracle and tragedy blurred until both became indistinguishable. Picture a settlement at dusk, dust rising in the fading light, livestock penned against the outer wall, villagers gathering near the healer's dwelling. A mother carries her child, whose fever has not broken for weeks. Hope and dread intertwine in her gaze. She believes the skull must be opened, that only then the evil spirit will fly away into the night. She watches as the healer lifts a crude blade and sets to work, each scrape echoing through the silent crowd. The child does not cry for long. Exhaustion steals the voice, leaving only shallow breaths. Hours later, whether the child stirs again or lies still, the ritual is declared complete. The villagers disperse, whispering prayers, convinced they have witnessed the touch of the divine. What unsettles us most is not the pain, not even the crude instruments, but the conviction behind it all. Entire communities shared this vision of sickness and remedy. They accepted suffering as part of the cure, blood as proof of purification. The scar became a badge of endurance, a mark of survival against unseen forces. And as centuries passed, these beliefs carried forward, reshaping into new rituals, new instruments, yet always echoing the same thought: the body must be broken to be healed. It is here, in this tension between agony and salvation, that the history of medicine takes its strangest turns. Salvation. That the path of medicine twists into strange corridors. What began as crude trephination evolved into ever more daring experiments. In lands far from the caves of early humanity, other remedies emerged, equally unnerving in their conviction. To cleanse the body of illness, physicians in ancient China prepared potions from mercury liquid metal, gleaming like molten silver. The idea was simple: if it shone with an eternal glow, surely it could preserve life. And so, men and women consumed drops of poison disguised as elixir, their veins carrying a substance that slowly corroded them from within. They believed vitality was seeping into their bones, even as tremors shook their limbs and madness clouded their vision. The paradox was grotesque. To drink what killed, hoping it would bestow eternal life. The Roman world was no stranger to extremes. In marble courtyards where fountains gurgled, physicians recommended remedies that to us seem grotesque. Gladiator blood was prized as a cure for epilepsy. After the arena fell silent and the sand was soaked with crimson, crowds rushed forward to collect still warm fluid, believing it carried the strength of the warrior. The taste of iron, thick and metallic, was swallowed in desperation. The line between horror and hope blurred beyond recognition. For the ill, this ritual was not revulsion but salvation, proof that even the dying breath of another could transfer its power into their frail bodies. Such beliefs reveal a thread that runs through all of history: the human refusal to accept weakness without ritual, without sacrifice. Meanwhile, across medieval Europe, sickness carried a different terror. Plague swept through streets, leaving silence where laughter once lived. Physicians, masked like dark birds, with beaks stuffed with herbs, wandered among the afflicted. Their long robes brushed the cobblestones, their canes prodded patients too dangerous to touch. They prescribed cures that seem absurd today: powdered emeralds, ground into dust to be swallowed with water, crushed beetles mixed with honey to ease fevers, or the burning of aromatic woods to drive away unseen vapors. Each action was steeped in ritual, creating a theater of healing that gave comfort even when it failed to cure. For the sufferers, the presence of the masked doctor was itself a charm against despair, a fragile lifeline in a world collapsing under invisible assault. Travel farther east, and you find healers who turned to needles and fire. Acupuncture in its earliest forms was less refined than the methodical practice known today. Points were pierced, not always with precision, and heated stones were pressed against the skin to chase away spirits thought to lurk beneath. The skin blistered, the air filled with the scent of scorched flesh, yet belief persisted. In the smoke and pain, there was trust in unseen currents flowing through the body, lines of energy that, if unblocked, would restore balance. Such practices may stir unease in modern minds, but within them lies a glimpse of humanity's desperate creativity, the relentless attempt to wrest control from chaos. What binds all these scenes is the hunger for order, the refusal to surrender to randomness. Every strange remedy carried its own ritual, its own symbolism that gave shape to suffering. A hole in the skull to free a spirit, liquid silver to prolong life, the blood of the strong to cure the weak. Each solution reflects the same impulse: to impose meaning on pain. And so the story moves forward, pulling us deeper into the labyrinth of medicine's strangest chapters, where hope and harm often walked side by side. It is in this labyrinth that the strangest echoes of history grow louder. Imagine the halls of medieval hospitals, where light filtered weakly through stained glass windows and the smell of rot clung to the stone walls. Here remedies became ceremonies, and ceremonies became a kind of theater of suffering. A physician might arrive with a jar of leeches, their bodies writhing in water like living strands of black ribbon. The patient, pale and trembling, lay still as the creatures latched onto their skin. Drops of blood welled up, not considered a loss, but a release. The doctor murmured that the body was full of humors. Blood, phlegm, bile, and balance had to be restored. Each leech was thought to sip away in excess, carrying illness with it. The marks they left behind were red circles, stinging symbols of a ritual repeated endlessly across kingdoms and centuries. Yet the leeches were not the most shocking of these cures. In some corners of Europe, ground-up bones were stirred into wine, a tonic meant to carry strength from the dead to the living. The irony was cruel. Vitality sought through the dust of corpses, hope swallowed in sips of bitterness. Elsewhere, oil distilled from human fat taken from the bodies of the executed was rubbed onto aching joints. The pain was supposed to dissolve as if flesh remembered its own vitality. Such remedies horrified the modern mind, yet they were trusted with unshakable faith. Desperation transformed decay into medicine, and suffering was dressed in ritualistic logic. Travel to the markets of Renaissance cities, and one would find jars of powdered mummies imported from distant lands. Apothecaries, displayed them as rare treasures, their labels promising strength, stamina, even protection against plague. Buyers believed they were consuming the preserved essence of ancient kings, a fusion of history and power entering their veins. The taste was earthy, bitter, yet it sold in large quantities, a strange commerce between death and hope. The image of nobles sipping mummy powder dissolved any line between reverence and grotesque indulgence. In these moments, medicine and magic blurred until they were indistinguishable, each feeding the hunger for survival. And then there was smoke heralded as a savior. During outbreaks, physicians carried pipes filled with tobacco, believing the fumes could purify the air and cleanse the lungs. Patients were encouraged to inhale deeply, to draw the acrid smoke into their bodies, convinced it would ward off the invisible death that stalked the streets. Stranger still, tobacco smoke was blown directly into the rectum of drowning victims, thought to rekindle breath by warming the core. Along riverbanks, kits for this bizarre resuscitation were stationed like life buoys, ready to blast smoke into the body of anyone dragged lifeless from the water. Hope, in this form, took on the strangest disguise. Clouds of smoke forced into silence, waiting for lungs to awaken. From skull drilling to mercury, from leeches to powdered bones, the pattern persists. Faith dressed as cure, ritual cloaked as medicine. What compels the human spirit to endure such torment is not naivety but the deep hunger to control what cannot be seen. Pain becomes an offering, blood becomes currency, and decay becomes salvation. Each era added its own verses to this unsettling hymn, and yet, despite centuries of failure, belief only grew stronger. It is within these contradictions, where healing becomes indistinguishable from harm, that history holds its most disquieting allure, and the story beckons us ever deeper into its shadows. The story deepens in the dim corridors of history, where every torchlit chamber and crowded marketplace whispers of remedies that blur the boundary between medicine and myth. In Renaissance Europe, belief in alchemy spread like fire across libraries and secret workshops. Scholars in long robes hunched over brass alembics, convinced that transmuting base metals into gold was no different from turning sickness into health. Patients drank concoctions infused with fragments of sulfur, arsenic, and salt, their bodies serving as crucibles for experiments that bordered on sorcery. The taste was acrid, searing the throat, yet each swallow was taken with reverence. Survival was interpreted as proof of the formula's power, while death was explained away as divine mystery. The practice endured because it fed a yearning to believe that within ordinary matter lay extraordinary salvation. Elsewhere, remedies drew from the grotesque with unflinching confidence. In Germany, powdered skull was prized as a treatment for headaches, the logic being that bone carried the essence of resilience. Apothecaries ground fragments into fine dust, their pestles striking rhythmically in shadowed shops. Customers purchased the powder in tiny vials, mixing it into beer or wine, swallowing each mouthful with both dread and hope. The irony was cruel. To silence pain in the head, one consumed the remnants of another's. Alongside this, dried moss scraped from graves was sold as an antiseptic charm, its green tendrils thought to absorb illness. To walk through these markets was to step into a theater where the border between medicine and necromancy collapsed entirely. In England, physicians promoted treatments that today seem little more than rituals of endurance. For persistent fevers, patients were placed in smoke-filled rooms where herbs, dung, and resin burned together, choking the air into a heavy fog. The patient's eyes watered, lungs strained, and yet attendants whispered that the sickness was fleeing with every cough. Sweat dripped, breath faltered, but when exhaustion gave way to silence, the ritual was declared successful. For those who lived, recovery was proof. For those who died, the cure was said to have been delivered too late. Such circular logic ensured faith never faltered, even in the face of failure. Journey southward to Italy, where belief in the healing power of touch manifested in more theatrical form. Monarchs claimed the divine ability to cure scrofula, a disease of the lymph nodes, by laying hands on the afflicted. Crowds gathered, kneeling, pressing forward to feel the brush of fingers they believed were blessed. The air filled with chants, tears, and the murmur of desperation. For many, the ritual itself became medicine, the sense of being chosen enough to spark hope that symptoms would fade. Though the swellings often remained, stories circulated of miraculous recoveries, fueling the legend and reinforcing loyalty to the crown. It was not only a cure but a tool of power, binding faith in the ruler to the possibility of healing. Beyond Europe, other civilizations crafted equally startling remedies. In India, Ayurveda prescribed elaborate regimens involving metals melted and purified until believed to embody divine properties. Gold ash was mixed with herbs and honey, prescribed to strengthen the heart and extend life. The metallic tang lingered on the tongue, leaving patients half believing they had swallowed sunlight. The ritual of preparation chants, offerings, the rhythmic grinding of ingredients imbued the potion with a sense of sacred inevitability. Whether the treatment healed or harmed, the ceremony itself created conviction strong enough to withstand doubt. In these stories, repetition of suffering and faith becomes evident. To consume the body of another, to swallow flames disguised as elixirs, to endure rooms filled with choking smoke, each act reveals the same truth. Humanity's desperation has no boundary when facing the terror of illness. These cures seem absurd through modern eyes, but within their time they were woven into the very fabric of hope. And so the chronicle moves forward, pulling us deeper into the shadowed history of healing, where each remedy feels less like science and more like a hallucination shared across centuries. To have been applied too late. The cycle repeated endlessly, each death folded into the logic of the cure, each survival exalted as proof of its power. Faith sustained these rituals even when evidence whispered otherwise, for the alternative was unbearable. To accept helplessness in the face of disease. In the streets of Paris, healers turned to another peculiar practice, bloodletting not with leeches, but with intricately designed lancets. These gleaming instruments were passed down as heirlooms, their blades opening veins with theatrical precision. Patients slumped as crimson life poured into bowls, convinced that sickness drained with it. Attendants fanned the faces of the fainting, whispering reassurances as though each drop carried away misfortune itself. The bowls were emptied into gutters, rivers of red disappearing into the earth, and the patients staggered home lighter, weaker, but believing balance had been restored. The ritual was so pervasive that kings and commoners alike submitted, bound together in the conviction that healing required loss. Beyond Europe's courts, travelers recorded astonishing remedies in distant lands. In the Ottoman Empire, physicians prescribed baths in boiling water infused with aromatic oils, steamrolled over tiled chambers, cloaking patients in heat so intense their skin flushed scarlet. The sensation was suffocating, the body forced to sweat until exhaustion blurred thought. Yet within that haze, the cure was said to emerge, as though illness could be steamed from the flesh. Survivors carried stories of renewal, their skin tingling with strange vitality, while those who collapsed in the baths were mourned as victims of fate, rather than failure. The line between therapy and trial by fire was dangerously thin, but belief rendered it acceptable. Meanwhile, in the frost-bitten villages of Scandinavia, folk healers relied on charms carved from antlers and bone. These talismans were pressed against wounds, their surfaces etched with runes said to channel the power of forgotten gods. Patients clutched them as infections raged, imagining warmth and light flowing from the symbols into their blood. To outsiders, it was superstition. To those within, it was salvation carved from nature itself. Songs accompanied the rituals, voices rising over frozen fields, carrying faith into the night air. Whether bodies healed or withered, the belief endured, reinforced by memory and myth. But perhaps the most bizarre chapter unfolded in Spain, where powdered gemstones were ground into fine dust and prescribed for nearly every ailment. Rubies for courage, sapphires for fevers, emeralds for failing sight. Apothecaries crushed jewels into glittering fragments, their pestles ringing against stone mortars like tiny bells of promise. The dust shimmered in the light, stirred into wine or scattered over bread, ingested as if the brilliance of the gem would ignite vitality within the body. Patients felt power not from science but from spectacle, the shimmering drink, the sparkle on the tongue, the illusion of swallowing wealth itself. And when they survived, the cure was credited to the stone, ensuring the ritual's survival across generations. Each of these remedies speaks to the same human impulse, the refusal to face mortality without action, without ritual. To bleed, to burn, to swallow dust or poison, each act promised control over chaos. They appear grotesque now, but in their time, they were vessels of hope. And so the chronicle of medicine stretches onward, drawing us deeper into its twilight corridors, where every cure carries the scent of desperation and every ritual blurs into a hallucination. Survivors rose from their sickbeds. Credit was given not to chance, but to the glittering stones. The belief that life could be drawn from Earth's treasures was so intoxicating that it spread through noble courts and merchant families alike. To consume jewels was to embody permanence, to invite strength as radiant as the gems themselves. And yet behind the shimmer lurked poison, fragments cut throats, dust-scarred lungs, and the body bore the cost of hope turned ritual. As centuries turned, the list of strange cures only grew longer. In rural France, it was thought that spider webs held healing power. Farmers collected them from barn rafters, rolling the delicate strands into clumps and pressing them onto open wounds. The sticky silk clung like gauze, whispering of nature's secret wisdom. Sometimes the webs sealed cuts long enough for the body to mend, other times infections spread more swiftly. Yet every story of survival reinforced the custom, weaving faith as tightly as the webs themselves. The patient gazed at the fragile threads upon their skin and believed that the earth itself was offering protection. Farther north, Scottish folk medicine leaned on rituals that now read like fragments of dreams. A child with whooping cough might be passed 3 times beneath the belly of a donkey, the air heavy with hay and the musky scent of animals. The act was not meant to be rational but symbolic, the crossing beneath a creature considered humble and strong, believed to strip the illness away. Families clutched at such customs, repeating them with solemn faces, for repetition itself felt like proof. When a child survived, it was the donkey's shadow that earned gratitude, not the chance resilience of the body. In Russia, winter villages turned to ice for their cures. For fevers, sufferers were submerged in freezing rivers, their bodies trembling violently as attendants chanted that heat was fleeing into the water. Breath caught sharp in the chest, skin burned with cold, but belief insisted that fever could not survive such an assault. Survivors stumbled out of the water gasping, their strength interpreted as renewal. Those who did not return were mourned as sacrifices to balance, their deaths unable to shake conviction. To immerse oneself in suffering was to wrestle with illness directly, and to emerge breathing was to win. Meanwhile, whispers from the New World brought tales of remedies unfamiliar to European ears. In the jungles of South America, shamans administered potions brewed from plants that warped the senses. Patients drank bitter liquids and fell into visions, their minds flooded with colors and spirits. Within the hallucination, illness was confronted, bargained with, or driven away. The ceremony was as much about transformation as healing, a voyage through shadow to reclaim the body. Even if fevers lingered afterward, the memory of visions gave a sense of having fought an invisible war. And in that feeling, belief became cure enough. Across these lands and centuries, the pattern gleams. Suffering was reshaped into meaning, ritual layered upon ritual until desperation became sacred. Each remedy, whether jeweled dust, spider silk, donkey shadows, icy rivers, or potions of hallucination, reveals the lengths to which humanity has gone to bend fate. What unites them is not efficacy but the human refusal to yield to silence. to lie still without action. And so, the chronicle pushes further, deeper into a gallery of practices where healing and harm mingle indistinguishably, binding us to the past through echoes of hope and dread. Stories spread of nobles recovering after sipping jeweled powders. Conviction grew unshakable. What mattered was not proof but narrative, the repetition of tales, the glamour of rituals that shimmered brighter than reason. In candlelit chambers, hope was consumed with every swallow, and desperation disguised itself as luxury. In the damp countryside of Ireland, another practice lingered: cures drawn from holy wells. Pilgrims carried jars to sacred springs, filling them with water believed to heal any affliction. They washed wounds until flesh grew raw, drank deeply despite the stagnant taste, and whispered prayers as though the liquid itself absorbed divine grace. The wells were ringed with ribbons and tokens left behind: shoes, coins, locks of hair, each a testament to faith exchanged for recovery. Generations returned to the same stones, convinced that beneath their surface flowed eternity itself. The ritual blurred the line between medicine and devotion, every sip a sacrament of survival. Farther east, in Poland, remedies carried a darker edge. Children with persistent illnesses were sometimes passed through cleft trees, as though rebirth through wood might strip away disease. Families cut deep notches into living trunks, forcing the sick to crawl through at dawn. The bark pressed against frail bodies, scratching skin, leaving streaks of sap like strange blessings. When the opening was bound again, the tree was said to absorb the sickness. Parents returned weeks later to see if the trunk survived. If it withered, the illness was considered too strong. If it lived, hope blossomed with its leaves. Such customs reveal how belief wrapped itself around nature, weaving health and decay into a single myth. Meanwhile, physicians of the Italian Renaissance championed remedies involving music. Flutes, lutes, and violins were played at the bedsides of the ill, melodies drifting like invisible medicine. Harmonies were said to soothe fevers, rhythm to align the humors of the body. Patients lay in candlelight, shivering yet entranced, as musicians performed not for entertainment but cure. Some whispered that certain modes banished melancholy. Others summoned joy strong enough to shake off disease. It mattered little whether the body truly healed. The ritual filled the air with order, a harmony that promised to tame the chaos of sickness. In the shadowed streets of Prague, another belief thrived: the curative power of executions. Crowds whispered that touching the hand of a freshly hanged man could cure warts or joint pains. Mothers brought children under cover of night to grasp lifeless fingers, the air heavy with fear and reverence. The corpse became a vessel of transformation, its silence interpreted as consent. For those who saw warts vanish afterward, no science could shake their conviction. It was a practice that fused horror with hope, ritual with revulsion, proof of the extremes to which humanity clung when health seemed out of reach. Each of these practices, wells, trees, music, and even the touch of death, illustrates the same pattern. The human mind will sculpt meaning into any shape that promises relief. Illness was not endured quietly, but battled with symbols, ceremonies, and sacrifices. The result is a gallery of treatments that appear bizarre, almost dreamlike, yet were lived with conviction fierce enough to blur centuries. And so, the chronicle continues, winding deeper into the corridors of memory, where every cure feels less like medicine and more like an incantation echoing through time. The march of time carried these rituals forward, reshaping them yet never extinguishing the hunger behind them. In the crowded alleys of 17th century London, when plague bells tolled and doors were marked with red crosses, the remedies became more desperate still. Some physicians prescribed mixtures of vinegar and crushed herbs to be inhaled through cloths held tightly over the mouth. The fumes burned the throat, stung the eyes, but were hailed as invisible shields against contagion. Others encouraged patients to live among animals, dogs, pigeons, even pigs, believing that disease would leap from human bodies into beasts and vanish with their lives. Households filled with the noise and smell of creatures, transforming homes into cages of living talismans. Hope was pinned on sacrifice, though the sickness often lingered regardless. Cross the channel to the Netherlands, and you find cures tied to the sea. Sailors believed that salt air itself healed the lungs, and so consumptive patients were carried onto ships, bundled in blankets, left to breathe the briny wind. The voyage was punishing. Cold waves crashed, dampness clung to bones, and stomachs churned with seasickness. Yet those who returned alive swore they felt lighter, cleansed by the endless horizon. Physicians, unwilling to argue with survivors, prescribed ocean voyages as medicine, and the harbors filled with coughing passengers seeking salvation in the spray of salt. For every cure claimed, another body was lowered into the waves, but the faith endured, as relentless as the tide. In the heart of Eastern Europe, charms made from iron were considered potent. Blacksmiths forged rings, bracelets, and amulets hammered under specific phases of the moon. Worn on the wrist or pressed against the skin, these talismans were said to draw sickness into their cold weight. Families passed them down like relics, the dark gleam of iron carrying an aura of strength. Sometimes they were heated until glowing and pressed briefly against sores, the hiss of flesh convincing onlookers that illness was fleeing in the smoke. The pain was immense, the scars permanent, but to endure it was to believe one had wrestled disease into submission. Meanwhile, in the distant deserts of Arabia, remedies were drawn from sand and fire. Hot stones were pressed to the body, and cauterization was used to burn lines across the skin. Each mark was not merely treatment but symbol, sealing the body against invasion. Patients bore these scars proudly, believing them to be gates barring sickness from re-entering. The smell of seared flesh filled the air, mingling with chants and prayers, binding agony into meaning. Those who healed became living proof, their bodies etched with maps of pain that were read as scripture of survival. Even stranger was the belief circulating in parts of Europe that powdered toads could cure internal ailments. Toads were dried, their bodies crushed into dust and swallowed in small doses. The taste was revolting, bitter and earthy, yet it was said to draw out poison from within. Patients gagged, some violently ill, but survivors declared themselves purged. Apothecaries stocked jars of the powder alongside more familiar herbs, proof that the grotesque and the sacred shared the same shelves. Each dose was a gamble, each swallow a negotiation between fear and hope. Across these continents and centuries, the treatments varied wildly: vinegar smoke, animal sacrifices, salt voyages, iron charms, fire scars, toad powders, but the rhythm remained the same. Sickness was never allowed to exist without ritual. Pain was sculpted into ceremony, chance survival exalted as miracle, and death folded quietly into the narrative of fate. These cures shimmer like hallucinations across the canvas of history, glimpses of a world where desperation and imagination walked hand in hand. And as the story unfolds further, one sees how deep this labyrinth runs, how far humanity was willing to go to demand meaning from suffering. Ache's searing mark was not only a wound but a boundary, a declaration that sickness would be barred from crossing back into the flesh. Families watched as smoke curled upward from the patient's skin, mingling with whispered prayers, the acrid scent clinging to the room long after the ritual ended. The scars became living inscriptions, testimonies written in pain, regarded as both medicine and talisman. Survivors carried them like brands of endurance, their very bodies transformed into manuscripts of suffering and salvation. In the crowded bazaars of Persia, apothecaries sold powders made from exotic creatures. Dried scorpions, ground into fine dust, were prescribed against fever and convulsions. The patient would swallow a spoonful mixed with honey, the grit catching in the throat, the bitterness spreading across the tongue. Belief declared that poison canceled poison, that by consuming venom, the body became immune to corruption. The ritual of ingestion was terrifying, yet it carried with it an intoxicating logic, a dare against death itself. Each survival became legend, each death a lesson folded into the myth of dosage and timing. The line between remedy and toxin blurred until they were one and the same. Meanwhile, in the jungles of Africa, treatments called upon both earth and sky. Healers painted bodies with clay, thick swathes of red and white covering the skin like armor. Beneath the blazing sun, the patient was left to stand until the earth hardened upon their body, cracking, flaking, and falling away. Each fragment was believed to carry illness back into the soil, returning sickness to the ground from which life sprang. The ritual was both spectacle and medicine, watched by entire villages who believed that collective gaze itself empowered the cure. When the patient walked again, stripped of clay, it was said they were reborn from the earth's embrace. In the icy expanse of Siberia, shamans relied on sound itself as a cure. Drums thundered in the night, their rhythms pulsing like a heartbeat larger than the body. Patients lay near the fire, eyes closed, listening as chants rose and fell in strange cadences. The vibrations rattled through bones, inducing trance, visions, and sometimes even unconsciousness. Illness was believed to be hunted away by the noise, driven into the forest where it would vanish with the dawn. Survivors remembered the pounding rhythm as the moment of transformation. The instant despair turned to strength. Even if fever lingered, the memory of drums convinced them they had fought and endured. Each culture, each century, poured its fear and faith into forms that feel like hallucinations when seen together. Scars etched in fire, venom swallowed as salvation, clay cracked beneath the sun, drums roaring in the darkness. The human body became canvas, crucible, and stage all at once, reshaped by desperation and ritual. These cures were not mistakes in their time. They were bridges built against the abyss, fragile and strange, yet strong enough to carry hope forward. And in that fragile hope lies the essence of medicine's strangest journey, the unyielding refusal to accept silence, even when silence might have been kinder, ped by hands desperate to command fate. In the markets of Central America, healers blended ritual with remedy in ways that confounded European travelers. Cocoa, chili, and blood from ritual cuts was stirred together into dark brews, consumed not for pleasure but for purification. The mixture burned the mouth, seared the stomach, and yet drinkers swore it drove sickness out like fire chasing shadows. Each cup was a ceremony, performed with chants and offerings, as though every swallow wove the drinker into the fabric of the divine. For those who survived illness afterward, the connection between ritual and recovery hardened into certainty, another stone in the foundation of faith. In Germany, physicians once promoted the curative power of rotting apples. Patients were instructed to sleep in rooms where fruit decayed, the sweet sour stench filling the air. It was thought that the disease would pass into the apples overnight, leaving the patient renewed. Each morning, the withered fruit was thrown into the river, carried away with whispers of farewell to the illness it had absorbed. For the sick, the ritual created a sense of control over the unseen, transforming decay into deliverance. Even when symptoms remained, the nightly repetition gave comfort, a rhythm that felt like progress in a world where medicine offered little else. Across the oceans, in Japan, treatments combined discipline with endurance. Some healers instructed patients to immerse themselves in icy waterfalls, the pounding water believed to hammer weakness from the body. The shock was immense, breath stolen in an instant, the skin numbed until it burned. Yet beneath the roar of water, many felt clarity, as if illness had been washed into the torrent. Survivors spoke of strength reborn, of vitality renewed through suffering. Those who collapsed were considered to have been too weak for the ritual, their deaths reinforcing the myth rather than breaking it. Pain became proof, endurance became medicine. Elsewhere in Europe, animals were enlisted as unwilling companions to the sick. Cats were placed on the chests of patients with respiratory ailments, their steady purrs believed to draw sickness away. Chickens were strapped to swollen lymph nodes, feathers ruffled, as if absorbing infection through proximity. The sight was grotesque, yet when illness receded, the credit was laid at the feet or wings of these creatures. Faith painted them as vessels of transference, their lives offered in quiet sacrifice. When they sickened or died, it only deepened conviction that disease had truly been drawn out. From cocoa and blood to rotting apples, from icy cascades to sacrificial animals, the catalog of cures expands like a fever dream. Each one reveals the same paradox. Desperation invents meaning where none exists, and ritual transforms the unbearable into something graspable. In these strange theaters of healing, fear was given shape, pain was wrapped in ceremony, and hope clung stubbornly to the edge of reason. The story winds onward, each remedy stranger than the last, each more revealing of the human refusal to let illness remain unchallenged. N shape, clothed in symbols that outlived their inventors. In the mountain villages of the Andes, guinea pigs were pressed against the bodies of the sick, their squeals rising as if echoing the patient's pain. When the animal was cut open afterward, healers claimed that its entrails mirrored the illness within the human it had touched. Families peered into the open body as though reading an oracle, convinced that the disease had been drawn away. The sacrifice of the small creature brought reassurance, and in that reassurance, strength returned to the patient. Belief turned slaughter into salvation, the line between ritual and cruelty erased by desperation. Across the plains of North America, smoke was medicine. Bundles of sage, cedar, and sweetgrass were burned. The smoke wafted over patients as healers fanned it with feathers. The air grew heavy, fragrant, almost suffocating, yet it was believed to carry away sickness on invisible currents. The ceremony was rhythmic, measured, imbued with chanting that mingled with the crackle of embers. Patients lay still, eyes half closed, surrendering to the haze. Healing was not only in the body but in the harmony of spirit and environment, a balance restored through fire and breath. Even when illness lingered, the memory of smoke became a shield, an intangible assurance that one had not been left defenseless. In the shadowed monasteries of medieval Europe, monks prescribed fasting as cure. For days, patients consumed nothing but water, their bodies weakening even as prayers grew louder. The idea was simple: to starve the body was to starve the illness as well. Hunger gnawed at the sick, lightheadedness blurred thought, but endurance was praised as virtue. Those who survived declared themselves cleansed, convinced that emptiness within had forced disease to depart. Each hollow belly was interpreted as testimony, each endurance of hunger another mark of faith. The body became battlefield and altar simultaneously, a vessel emptied to invite healing. Further east, in China, remedies employed the bizarre elegance of acupuncture combined with fire cups. Heated glass vessels were placed on the skin, their suction raising purple welts. Patients endured the sting, convinced that stagnant energies and poisons were being pulled outward. The marks remained for days, bruises worn proudly as evidence of purification. To outsiders, it looked like injury. To believers, it was proof that the body's invisible currents had been cleansed. The line between harm and healing blurred once again, yet conviction transformed the pain into progress. Whether through smoke, starvation, sacrifice, or fire, each cure carved meaning into suffering. The rituals may seem alien now, almost nightmarish, yet they echo a truth that transcends time. When faced with illness, humanity refuses stillness. Action, however strange, feels like resistance. Belief wraps around each gesture, converting agony into hope. The chronicle continues, each practice stranger, each detail more vivid, as though history itself were conspiring to remind us how far we will go to defy the silence of sickness. Been abandoned in the battle against suffering, the haze clung to hair, to fabric, to memory itself, so that long after the fire dimmed, its promise lingered. To breathe smoke was to breathe faith, and that faith, however fragile, became medicine enough to carry another day. Far away in the courts of Europe, another strange prescription surfaced: powdered gold. Physicians prepared it as though they were alchemists, shaving fine slivers of the precious metal into broths or wines. The glittering flecks sank like tiny suns, consumed by nobles desperate to stave off decay. The logic was seductive. If gold resisted rust, perhaps it could guard flesh from corruption. Tongues sparkled with the metallic tang, stomachs churned with the indigestible weight. But belief blinded patients to the futility. Wealth was swallowed as hope, each dose a dazzling illusion that sickness could be outshone by brilliance. The cost was ruinous, yet to those who could afford it, no price was too high for the illusion of eternity. In villages across Eastern Europe, remedies grew stranger still. Bread baked with ashes from burned shoes was served to those with fevers. Families gathered around ovens, solemnly mixing soot into dough, convinced that by consuming what had endured miles of wear, the patient might inherit resilience. The bread was bitter, char clinging to the tongue, but it was eaten with determination. If the fever broke, it was attributed to the ritual, the ashes transformed from filth into a secret ingredient of salvation. Even failure could not unseat the practice, for belief always found a way to preserve itself. Meanwhile, in the deserts of North Africa, camel urine was consumed as tonic. Its warmth and sharpness was said to cleanse the body, to purge poisons invisible to the eye. Nomadic healers offered it with conviction, assuring that those who drank it would find renewed strength beneath the blazing Sunday. The act was revolting, but desperation often silences revulsion. And when survivors walked again, their recovery was chained forever to the ritual, immortalizing it in lore. The desert wind carried stories of those healed, each tale inflating conviction until it became unbreakable. In the far corners of Asia, another practice rose, the ingestion of ground pearls. Mothers dissolved them into warm milk for children weakened by illness. The liquid shimmered faintly in lamplight, a drink that seemed almost magical. Families believed that pearls, born in the secret depths of the sea, carried purity strong enough to restore life. Each swallow was imagined as an infusion of ocean strength, each sip a tether to eternity. Though bodies often remained frail, the act itself filled rooms with hope, and hope softened the edges of despair. To swallow pearls was to believe one was drinking the very essence of resilience. These remedies, gold, ashes, urine, pearls, appear grotesque or absurd to modern thought, but in their time, they were woven seamlessly into the fabric of survival. They reveal not ignorance, but longing, the eternal refusal to accept that illness might triumph unchallenged. Ritual turned matter into meaning, no matter how unlikely the vessel. The chronicle stretches onward, painting humanity as a creature forever clawing at the edges of fate, unwilling to yield even when the cost of hope was almost indistinguishable from suffering itself. To modern thought, yet they reveal a thread running through all human history, the determination to turn the ordinary, the grotesque, or the precious into vessels of healing. In rural Italy, one such vessel was fresh animal blood. Patients with weakness or wasting sicknesses were given cups of goat or lamb's blood to drink, still warm from slaughter. The taste was thick, metallic, and revolting, yet it was praised as a source of vigor. The belief that life could be transferred directly through the essence of another creature burned so brightly that revulsion was dismissed as weakness. Those who stumbled away alive were paraded as living proof, their recovery attributed not to chance, but to the crimson draught. In Eastern monasteries, monks sought purity through controlled poison. Small doses of venom from snakes or scorpions were ingested over months, a process believed to harden the body against future strikes. Patients trembled with sweats and dizziness, some collapsing into silence, yet those who endured found themselves hailed as proof of immunity. Legends grew of men who could survive bites that felled others, their strength credited to the ritual of slow poisoning. It was a gamble with death, a wager where the prize was resilience and the price was life itself. In the crowded towns of France, another eerie cure found its place, touching the skin of the dead. The hand of a corpse freshly lifted from its grave was laid upon tumors or skin growths, the chill of death considered a purifier. Families lined at churchyards, seeking to press their sick against the remnants of another life. The stillness of the graveyard mingled with whispered prayers, as if silence itself carried away disease. When afflictions disappeared naturally, credit was given to the contact. When they persisted, families believed the ritual had been performed incorrectly. Death became medicine, and grief transformed into ritualistic hope. Meanwhile, in parts of India, the ritual of fire reached extremes. Patients with chronic ailments were instructed to walk barefoot across glowing embers, their cries rising into the night air. The act was seen not as punishment, but as purification, flames licking at souls until skin blistered. Survivors who limped away were celebrated as reborn, their suffering transformed into spectacle. The fire's bite was interpreted as the disease itself being consumed, pain redefined as progress. Each step became both ordeal and offering, binding belief to agony in ways both haunting and unforgettable. And in forgotten corners of Europe, powdered ivory was treasured as remedy for coughs and weakness. Traders brought it from distant lands, shavings and dust that was stirred into broth or sprinkled into wine. Families consumed it reverently, imagining the strength of colossal beasts coursing into their frail frames. The ivory's hardness was believed to transfer durability, each sip a silent plea for endurance. Though invisible in its effects, the ritual itself gave structure to suffering, turning meals into ceremonies of survival. Each of these practices, blood, poison, corpse, fire, ivory, illustrates a truth deeper than science alone. When confronted with frailty, humans turn to transformation. Matter is reshaped into meaning. Ritual overwrites reason, and even the most disturbing acts become sanctified by hope. These cures, though strange, remind us that desperation is endlessly inventive, and belief can twist the unbearable into something that feels almost holy. S believed the ritual had been flawed, or that the deceased chosen lacked sufficient power. The graveyard, damp with fog and echoing with the sound of shovels, became less a place of mourning and more a theater of hope. Children clutched rosaries, mothers whispered promises, and fathers carried the weak into the cold embrace of silence. To touch death was to barter with it, trading fear for the faint glimmer of renewal. In Ottoman cities, physicians promoted a treatment that harnessed fire more directly. Metal rods, heated until they glowed, were pressed onto the skin near diseased tissue. The hiss of burning flesh filled the room, screams swallowed by the heavy scent of char. It was believed that sickness fled from flame, that illness could not withstand the mark of purification. Patients bore scars for life, lines etched across their bodies like cryptic symbols, reminders that survival required sacrifice. When the infection receded, faith solidified. When it did not, the ritual was repeated with greater intensity. Each scar was considered both shield and testament. Travel to Scandinavia and you encounter a ritual that blended superstition with endurance. Frost was regarded as medicine, and the sick were left to lie naked on snow under the northern sky. Breath crystallized in the air, skin blazed with icy fire, and attendants muttered prayers while watching for signs of recovery. Some survived the ordeal, returning to their huts trembling but alive, and their endurance was praised as evidence that illness had been banished into the frozen earth. Others never rose, their bodies claimed by the cold. Yet even these deaths did not break the ritual's hold, for communities argued that only the weakest were lost, and the strong had been purified. In China, treatments extended into the strange realms of diet. Ground tiger bones were stirred into teas, their strength believed to transfer into the drinker's own limbs. Apothecaries prepared powders with solemnity, claiming that the essence of the beast carried endurance and vitality. The bitter brew scorched tongues and bellies alike, yet families consumed it reverently, convinced that they were swallowing the wild power of the jungle. Each sip bound belief to the ancient animal, each swallow transforming fear into the illusion of strength. The tiger's ghost, it was said, prowled within, driving illness away. Perhaps most haunting of all were the rituals involving human fat, harvested from executed criminals. In parts of Europe, it was melted into balms and rubbed on aching joints or wounds. The ointment was thick, greasy, and foul-smelling, but it was believed to carry vitality stolen from the condemned. Patients spread it across skin with trembling hands, convinced they were absorbing another's life force. Survivors praised the salve, and whispers of miracles spread in its wake. What we see as grotesque was, for them, a bargain, to borrow strength from death itself in the fight against decay. These rituals, corpse-touching, fire scars, frost trials, tiger bones, human fat paint, a portrait of desperation both chilling and awe-inspiring. They remind us that history's remedies were not random madness, but carefully sculpted beliefs, shaped by terror and by hope. Each scar, each swallow, each whispered prayer was an act of defiance against the void, proof that no generation surrendered without first transforming suffering into ceremony. Beast powders and salves of human fat draw together into a tapestry that is both grotesque and mesmerizing. Each practice, though alien to us, was anchored in the same impulse: to act rather than wait, to resist passivity even when action bordered on madness. The chronicles of medicine reveal not only the body's fragility, but also the mind's refusal to accept it. For every scar etched by fire, for every sip of gold or pearl, for every breath of smoke or gulp of venom, the story is less about science and more about the rituals that gave shape to fear. In the palaces of Europe, rituals were dressed in silk and incense. Nobles consulted astrologers before treatments, believing that the alignment of stars dictated whether bloodletting or purging would succeed. Physicians traced constellations on parchment, whispering that Saturn governed melancholy, Mars governed fevers, and only when the heavens agreed could the cure take hold. Patients reclined beneath painted ceilings, waiting for fate to turn in their favor. The line between medicine and prophecy blurred until both became indistinguishable, a fusion of cosmos and body that soothed the soul if not the flesh. In rural Asia, remedies often fused the animal with the divine. Powdered horn, dried seahorses, and even preserved lizards were consumed as though nature itself had scattered keys to vitality across its creatures. Each swallow carried the promise that strength, virility, or endurance could be transferred like a secret current from beast to man. Belief shimmered brighter than reason, and markets thrived on the trade of these strange talismans. To partake was to join a lineage of survival, no matter how unlikely the vessel. By the time whispers of germs and invisible worlds began to surface, centuries of ritual had already etched themselves into the human psyche. Even as microscopes revealed hidden truths, echoes of older cures lingered, their memories so strong that reason could not erase them. To this day, remnants survive, herbal charms hung in doorways, talismans worn against the skin, whispered prayers breathed over wounds. They stand as ghosts of the labyrinth humanity wandered, reminders that fear will always sculpt itself into ritual when certainty falters. Looking back, the story reads like a fever dream. Skulls pierced to free spirits, jewels swallowed in glittering desperation, corpses touched in silent graveyards, flames pressed to flesh, frost embraced as salvation. Yet beneath the strangeness lies something achingly human, the refusal to be helpless. These cures were not only about illness, but about identity, about shaping suffering into something bearable, even beautiful. Pain became proof, scars became scripture, and each ritual, however bizarre, was a declaration that life was worth fighting for. The chronicle closes, not with mockery of the past, but with awe at its persistence. In the dance between despair and hope, the human spirit forged remedies as varied as imagination itself. They may have been born of misunderstanding, yet they reveal a deeper truth, that hope, even when flawed, is the oldest and most enduring medicine of all.